The time to build is upon us.
With great power comes great responsibility.
You know the greatest danger facing us? Ourselves.
A rational fear, we all know.
Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
This is the Superhuman Academy podcast.
Hello, Danielle.
Hello, how are you?
How am I feeling right now? Thank you for asking. I am feeling content. And I have a little bit of sympathetic tone, nervous energy. I don't know. Interesting combination. How about yourself?
I'm actually feeling pretty relaxed. I did hot yoga about an hour ago and it got me all juicy. So I'm feeling pretty good. And I'm very excited for this conversation. I'm kind of curious to see where it takes us.
As am I. I have no idea where it's going to go. I did listen to a very brief snippet of our last conversation. So it was something I wanted to tap back into. I think maybe we could dig back into it by, well, I'll give this. So last time we spoke, you struck me as somebody who has spent a lot of time seeking to understand yourself and doing it in a very open, curious, non-assumptive way. It seemed to me that you'd kind of stripped back all these assumptions and just I wonder what I'm like. Let's find out. Is that accurate?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
And I'd be curious to know how you've gone about doing that, and maybe what is the thing you've been most surprised to learn about yourself?
Ooh, that's great. Do you want me to jump right in?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Um, that's absolutely accurate. And I love that you asked me what surprised me the most about myself because I think that that is one of the aspects of my journey that keeps surprising me is that I think that I've pulled back all of these layers and that I've understood myself. And it's like the moment that I think that I know myself, I keep surprising myself in sometimes really good ways and other ways that, maybe hurt a little. And so I think that, one of the ways that I have learned about myself has been through holistic planning and goal setting, which I think is a little counterintuitive to most people, that they might think of those things as ways to achieve things or manage their time. But I think for me, those have been tools to actually collect data on myself and to learn about myself and to adapt and to be flexible. But through that process, I've learned things like, um, I remember one time my mom said to me, "Danielle, you're so intense." And I'm like, "I'm not intense, I'm funny." You know? And I was so surprised that that's how she described me, and then I started paying attention, and I was like, "Whoa, I am, like, this really intense person." Like, if I'm playful, I'm intensely playful, but I'm also really serious about life and living it well and delightfully and connecting with others, and I'm serious about the work that I do making a difference. And so, I think that there has been all sorts of things that I've learned about myself that have surprised me.
I think at the end of our last conversation, I kind of
Mhm.
teased this. There's something about you that I'm having trouble putting my finger on, and I think that it's something like that. You have a very unusual expressive cadence, which have you heard someone say that before?
Um, I like to joke that growing up, I was not the smart kid. Like, almost all of my report cards describe me as unique. I was, like, the weird kid.
Mm,
And and so, I think that most of my life, people have described me as unique, but I've not always been able to sometimes I'm aware of that, and sometimes I'm unaware of
mhm.
kind of my quirkiness, I suppose.
Yeah, specifically what I notice is you oscillate back and forth between this extremely bright smile and you have the what is it, like the Duchenne smile, it's very much in your eyes, and to a very somber, serious, expression. And it's back and forth really, really quickly. Do you experience yourself that way? Like, internally? Do you experience it as very much like a back and forth, up and down, or more continuous?
Um, I do experience it as a back and forth, up and down. I don't think that it feels like whiplash to me, but it can to people that I'm around. And so, um, I also I create plays. I, like, create performances in, like, a small theater. I've been doing that as part of my professional work for the last 20 years, and one of the responses that I get to a lot of my art is that it kind of will move before between kind of goofy and playful to we're getting incredibly serious about something.
Mhm.
And I I guess I just feel like I'm all of those things all at once. So it doesn't feel well, maybe it doesn't always feel like I'm moving back and forth. It's just like tapping into different aspects of me that are always there.
Mhm. Yeah, that's kinda what I was curious about, if you experience it as 2 different personalities or 1 personality.
Yeah, definitely one.
Yeah. Huh. It's very
But I
interesting.
think that it can, it's well received, I think, a lot, though I do think that it can be a lot for other people to sometimes hold.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because there's the natural, like, desire to reciprocate and yeah, I'm sure you kinda take people on a ride as far as the emotional range you express within a
Absolutely.
short amount of time. So is that something that you've cultivated very consciously, or you've just kinda always naturally been that way?
I think that that is something that has always been a part of me, but it is an aspect of myself that I think I've only recently been as aware of.
Mm, mhm. Well, we don't need to focus on your, um, emotional dynamism the whole time, but I I do wanna explore more of the way in which you have, like, specific I hate the word techniques, specific practices that you've engaged in to understand yourself better. I'm always looking for ways to understand myself better, and so I'm curious what you've done.
Yeah, um, I've always been a journaler, so journaling has been a really important part of that. I hit a really hard moment in my mid-30s where I was actually accomplishing a lot of the things that I wanted. So I had just earned tenure as a professor, which was a really big deal. I had just had my first kiddo, my second kiddo was on the way. We had bought a house and we were really building community. And I felt like I should have been elated, but I was really exhausted. And I think that that was the first moment too that I started to question why I was doing all the things that I was doing. And in that moment, I felt a pull to figure out what was next. And I realized I didn't know myself. And that's when I think I got really serious about going, okay, not just what do you want to do, but who do you want to be moving forward? And if I wanted, and I needed to know who I was in order to go on that journey. And so I always liked journaling, but I could never diary. Like, the idea of a diary seemed really drab to me to just report, I don't know, what I've been doing. And so I needed to find some different ways to do that. And I started experimenting with different prompts, questions that actually got me excited to put pen to paper. And I, every day would ask myself questions, what is lighting me up? What's giving me energy? Do I really like this? What was going on that drained me so much the other day? And I, through that was also then making decisions about how I was going to move forward. Okay, so that drained me. How do I create a day today that has less of that draining thing? And where is agency in there for me?
Mhm. What is the question that is most inspiring and interesting to you right now in this moment? You're most curious about?
Mm, I think that I'm sort of most curious about I, like, wanna turn this back on you.
That's
I wanna
fine.
that I think I'm most curious about, um, what would be most helpful for you and what like, I wanna know what your own journey has been in learning about yourself and some of the tools that have helped you, and, I'm just, like, curious. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we can share, trade back and forth here. Mhm. Um, I've shared this a few different times in these recordings, but I can give a different angle to it. One of the things that has been biggest for me was, a mentor of mine gave me this assignment to write out all the feeling words I could think of. The initial assignment was 200 positive, 200 negative, without any external reference, so, like, no cheating using the dictionary or the internet or anything. Um, and I historically would have described myself as somebody with, uh, very stable and subdued emotions, uh, you know, not very high highs or low lows, just very stable, kind of neutral most of the time, and that experience opened my mind to the fact that that wasn't really true. It was just that I was very oblivious to, like, what is an emotion? What does an emotion feel like? How do I identify them, pull them apart? I had just gone through so much of my life, not really intentionally blocking them out or anything, just being, again, kind of just oblivious, like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing or a part of me that I could explore. And doing that exercise, I ended up writing a lot more. I wrote like 1,350 or something at this point. I've got the thing written somewhere, but I was shocked by that. First of all, I had no idea there were that many different like feeling words or expressions. But what was really interesting is as I was doing it, I started to notice as I would write a word, I would have this little phantom flash of something. And I started to pay attention to that and I started to notice, oh, like I'm actually getting a sense of what that feeling is and what it feels like to have that. And the longer term consequences of that exercise have been a curiosity about what I can detect and learn about myself. Um, it's like a game. You talked about generating questions and asking yourself questions. I do the same thing, except oftentimes it's not necessarily a verbalized question. Like it's not articulated in words. It's more of an internal experiment of like I'll go into my third eye, imagined world, whatever, my internal visualization, whatever's just going on, and I will play around with the physics because the physics of my internal world are not exactly the same as the physics out here. Um, and there's this one experiment, my mentor also showed this to me. but you can test this out in your mind right now. It's very interesting. You imagine yourself on a beach and you plant a little stick in the sand, and you imagine the waves wash up over the shore and then pull back, and you see it. Is your stick still there? Like, is it still standing in the sand, or was it pulled out to sea? And usually, if people just kind of plop a stick in the ground in their mind, and the sand and the water comes over it, then it gets pulled out to sea. But then you can play this little game of, okay, well, if I know that a wave's coming and I want to make sure that it doesn't get pulled out to sea next time, I've got some time in my brain to prepare. And you can, like, right, put a post in the sand, you can hammer it down, you can put a stake, whatever, and you imagine it getting hit with water, and you can see, and you get to test it, and you don't actually know what's going to happen until you watch what your brain does. And it can surprise you, like, oh, well, I really thought that was going to stay there, but actually the water pulled it back out. And so you can keep playing this game where it's like, okay, well, now it's going to be the storm of all storms is going to hit my beach. I'm going to imagine Sharknado times 10, all of the things, the biggest waves I can conceive of, and I'm going to try to plant something in the ground that won't move. And so these are the types of experiments I like to play with, of just, there's so many different things you can test of, like, what will happen if I set up this scenario. They're not all just imagined visualizations. It can be, physical experiences as well. Like, this might sound strange, but sometimes in the shower I'll stand with my face directly into the water, and so that if I were to take an inhale, I would inhale a bunch of water, and just stand there without breathing and seeing what my brain will do. At what point will it panic? What happens when it panics? Like, will I be able to recover from that just fine? Like, but you can just run experiments with yourself, and that's the approach I've taken. It's been very much like, okay, I don't know what I would do in that scenario. I don't know what my brain will do. I don't know what my body will do. Let's just test it within as safe of boundaries as I can construct, and see what happens. And that's the journey I've been on, especially like the past couple of years. I've been a lot more intentional about that, a lot more intensive about it. And I've just found that every time I learn, to your point earlier, every time I learn something, it opens up 10 new lines of inquiry. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. If I stand there under the water with not breathing, I specifically can identify the feeling that it generates now, which is there's a little twinge in the back right quadrant of my brain at a certain point, and that's the initial twinge of panic of drowning, and I know what that specific feeling feels like, and I can name it. And then I also know, like, how I can calm my nervous system in response to that, because I've tested that as well. And a couple years ago, if you had asked me about, like, how does your brain respond to the specific sensation of drowning? I'd be like, I don't know. Sounds terrible. I'm not going to test that out. Um, but it's really interesting to find those things out about yourself, or it has been for me anyway. So that's been some of my experimentation. What thoughts does that inspire for you?
Right away, it made me realize how often I did things like that when I was a kid, but somewhere along the way, the sort of magic of what if seemed to fade away as an adult, where, I can imagine as a kid, being in the bathtub and being like, I'm going to see how long I can hold my breath. And, will I panic? And what will I do? And, there's some point where, that's not what I did in the bath, you know? And so, I do think a lot of learning about myself has been exploring the what ifs. Well, what if I imagined this from this perspective? And what if I did that? And then also just the intricacies of all the emotions that you were describing, and it's amazing how many you were able to collect. And, it reminded me just the other day, I was teaching a course, and I was sharing with my students that in, sometime, like, about a decade or 2 ago, I was I held an event called the Big Squad at LSU. And it is an event that the World Toilet Organization does, and it's to raise awareness of the 2.2 billion people that don't have access to clean water and sanitation. And I had been exploring this in a lot of my research, and I use performance as a way to help people understand issues. And so I had done a quick little lecture, and then we all walked out to the LSU parade grounds. There was over 100 of us, and we squatted on the parade grounds for 1 minute together. And there was a student next to me who, when she squatted, all of a sudden realized that some of her friends were walking by. And it was clear that she had been doing this for extra credit or something like that. And all of a sudden she had got caught, in the act. And you could just see her get so embarrassed. And I've always wondered about that moment
Mm.
and how, I'm like, did that bring some awareness to her that she was just pretending? Your moment, because from a pedagogical standpoint, from like how do we teach people things, I never and and so the conversation that we were having in class was, can shame ever be productive? And of course, like recognizing too that shame and embarrassment are different things. Can embarrassment ever be generative? Um, are these tools that you'd ever, want to consciously use to raise awareness in people? And I've been so, being aware of our emotions is so wildly important. And then to sort of just think about, for me, the possibility that all of the different emotions that you jotted down can elicit. And I get so interested in, what are those emotions trying to teach us?
I'm very curious about the question you just asked or posed. It sounded like you maybe have some theories related to embarrassment, shame, and their relative generativity or usefulness. Have you tested and learned anything about that?
I did end up doing a bit of a deep dive in terms of other people's research literature on it, though I hadn't really done any of my own like experiments with it. Um, I am really interested in particularly embarrassment as a teaching tool, as a tool that might actually help us empathize, which is really, I think that that's fascinating because I don't think that we almost would think about empathy and especially shame as being at odds with each other. That if we're in a shame moment, if we're in a shame spiral, our ability to empathize is probably lessened. And so it becomes interesting to me to think if embarrassment is oftentimes described as a lesser form of shame.
Mm.
And interestingly enough, some of my own research around actually shame as pedagogy or a transformative tool was written about in stand up comedy and how stand up comics might use shame as a humor device that also in that moment it functions to elicit our critical thinking skills. So that then shame actually, could be productive or generative in that sense because it is actually asking us, for the example with a student that's squatting that all of a sudden is embarrassed, it's it can create a juxtaposition, right? Like this moment of realizing, you know, this is my experience and I'm embarrassed. What are other people's experiences? And so in that sense, I mean, I think that there's possibility there. I think it's one that I speak with caution because I also think that, obviously shame or embarrassment could be used as a tool to harm people too.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really curious how you would define embarrassment. When I think of it, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about that, but it just off the cuff intuitively seems like the embarrassment response is it's almost like a fawn response. And so that yeah, I'm just connecting dots in my head here. Seems like that would be perceived a response to perceived threat or hostility, and then an attempt to basically smooth it over and blend back into the environment. It's like self-protective. So it'd be like inviting empathy or um
Mm.
and also like lowering your own threat status because it's kind of like a turtling type of right. Like think of people doing the shrug and they're blushing and that's it's very much a like turtle turtle response. I don't know. It sounds like you've dug into it though. Like what is embarrassment?
It's been a long time since I dug into it.
Okay.
Um,
If it's not something that
super
you
I mean,
are inspired by in this moment, then we could
yeah, I
pick
mean, I think I remember reading it as sort of like a lower level shame response. So it's not as intense as shame. It's not as intense as, like, I am a bad person, right?
mm,
Where I think with shame, there can be some of those other scripts that attach to it. I also think embarrassment's an interesting thing because most of the time we feel embarrassed is when we have broken some sort of a social norm,
yeah.
which is a little bit different than I think shame. We also maybe have broken an expectation, but, um, yeah, I don't
Mm. Yeah, I'm very curious about it as a teaching tool. Like I've thought of so not thought of. I've found intentionally shining a light on discomfort, which often does lead to embarrassment as being highly effective in in the context of a safe environment relationship. And if the person who's having the spotlight shown on them is capable of some like metacognition in that moment of noticing, oh yeah, I am embarrassed right now. And they feel safe enough and capable of expressing that. I'm in a couple different containers right now where that's kind of the practice is like pointing out, oh, hey, that little thing you just did, like that was an uncomfortable, that was a nervous laugh. That was like you're wringing your hands or you're like covering your mouth or whatever, and just like spotlighting it. And then when you do that, it's really interesting because the person's natural response will be to double down on that behavior because now they just got more uncomfortable and that's their discomfort alleviation behavior. And so then it's like, and then they're even more uncomfortable because they're noticing in themselves and it's this whole spiral. But um, can end up being really effective because once you've got attention drawn to that, it's like, oh, that's an area in which apparently I'm coping and I don't actually know of an effective replacement behavior there. That's a gap, and my brain has come up with this strategy to kind of cover up the gap, so I don't have to think about it and can avoid it. But to your point, it's like, well, the embarrassment can point, or even shame can point a finger at, hey, there's a gap there. And if you are aware enough to hear that information and that lesson, and hopefully you have support in replacing it, that can be opportunity.
Mm. I think it's wonderful that you have circles, support systems where you can practice that, or people that are able to point that out for you. Those little moments of, "Ooh, I think you might be uncomfortable in this moment."
Well, yeah, it's very strange. It's not something that people typically do. I've done it to some people in normal interactions before, and, uh, it's gone different directions. But
That's one of the really weird experiences of going on a journey to learn a lot about yourself, is that you do find yourself in circles where you have this amazing group of people that also wanna learn about themselves, and you get in the habit of talking with each other in particular ways and pushing each other in certain ways, and then you go into other spaces, and you might say some of the things that you would with the people with others that are as invested in this, and people look at you like, "What is"
you're not supposed to say those things.
Yes, that's, like, a weird thing to say, and maybe it is.
So have you been in similar circles then?
I think that I'm growing those circles. S
Yeah.
when when I kind of was in my muck moment, I guess I'll say, I had I'd started to just play around with, all of these different practices that would help me learn about myself. So I was decorative planning was one of them. I'd actually had a student give a presentation on how she was using decorative planning as a way to help navigate her anxiety. She had been, had done a session with her therapist, and she was talking about how much she would procrastinate using her calendar or creating to-do lists or reminders or anything like that, and so her therapist said, "Well, you like to doodle, so why don't you doodle around those things, and then it can be a work of art, and you're gonna have a different response around it," and I was like, "That's lovely. I have no artistic skills, but I can use stickers." So I started doing some decorative planning, and I started I teach identity work. But I hadn't really been thinking about it that way quite yet. But I'd had a group of friends where I said, "Hey," we called ourselves the Goal Get 'em Girls. We would get together once a month, and it was almost like what other people might describe as a mastermind sort of model, but we didn't know that's what we were doing. We would
Mhm.
just get together, and there'd be, like, an area of our life, like a life domain, where I'd be like, "Hey, you seem really good at adulting around finances. Like, could you share, like, how are you doing that? And could you lead that month?" And so we would just take turns
Mhm.
really sharing with each other different things that was working for us, and we were doing activities and things like that, and I was like, "Oh, this is really fun." And that's kind of how I got into creating my own podcast and doing some of this work that I'm doing now outside of higher ed, but I hadn't and then through that, I think more and more I'm seeking out circles of people that wanna live full, amazing lives and understand that understanding yourself is such a huge part of that.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I think I've spent more time in those circles, and it's been interesting, though, because, mm, there's almost a whiplash when you're in spaces and places where people haven't done the work,
Mhm. Yeah, I felt that.
and that's been an interesting thing to navigate. Sometimes I wanna invite people in and be like, "Come play with me."
Mhm.
And other times I can find myself, like, judging them, like, "Get your stuff together." Like, learn about yourself a little. Like, um, and then I'll catch myself, or there's times where I think, I have to fight the urge to, mm, push people into wanting the same journey that I've been on, and knowing
Mhm.
that's not really possible. Like, they have to come to it on their own.
Yeah. Yes, that's certainly true. Sometimes it is interesting to go from groups. I have the opportunity to be in several different groups and a lot of people who pay a lot of attention to subtext and are listening to what's being said behind what's being said and what's being expressed at the deeper level, and then to interact with people who are not aware of subtext per se and don't know what they're communicating to the world, and to it's like they're saying things and what I'm hearing is, "I'm desperately lonely," or "I'm extremely uncomfortable right now. Somebody please help me." And that's not what they're saying, but it's what they're saying. Or things like
Mhm.
that, and then to feel like what you said, the desire to the way I experience it is often like a desire to shake someone by the shoulders. Like, that's the the impulse, like, I just said, "Ah," like, "Hey, wake up." I
Get it
hear you.
together. I want you to be able to live a fuller, happier life. Like, get out of this muck. Let's go. Oh.
Yeah, yeah, get out of the muck. Hmm. You said that you teach identity work. I have a sense of what that probably might be, but I'm not exactly sure. Um, how how would you describe your identity?
Ooh, shucks. I didn't know that's where we are gonna go. Um, I
Plot
talk about my
twist.
routine, right? Um, hmm, I think about my own identity as evolving and shifting and not very stable, um, kind of ever changing. It's something that's
Mhm,
hard to fully, like, grasp. Um, I think of my identity as multifaceted. Um, I do think about my identity as something that's been cultivated through my life experiences, through things that I was also born into, whether that be, culture or socioeconomics or race or religion, those things that we um, experience from the time that we're born that maybe we didn't, make decisions around, or they were made for us as kids. And so I think that it's my identity is the culmination of all of those things. Um, Also, I really do believe that identity is informed by how we imagine our futures. So our ability to imagine what's ahead for us also impacts how we understand ourselves now. So it's not just this past, but it's also our future that makes us who we are in the moment. And um, yeah, so I think that identity is a thing that we do. So I do think about identity as something that isn't just like something that we have, but something that we practice, that we make, that we um interpolate into existence, right? That, even as I'm talking with you now, that I am creating some iteration of who I am that is going to, and, continue to inform my identity moving forward. So identity is also something that we have agency over. So identity is something that we can create, that we make, and that we're always making.
Would you say that identity I'm interested to hear, like, how you define identity. You described how it might form, but not necessarily what it is. Would you say that it could be like a collection of truth statements about oneself? Would that be
Ooh, I like that. I think I would probably just simply say identity is who you are.
Mhm.
Um, I'm pretty fascinated by I'm pretty fascinated by how we cultivate identity, and and I've always been really interested in change, right? Like, how do we change? Do we change? Like, is change inevitable? Is change something that happens incrementally, or is it something that is revolutionary? And I've been really fascinated by that at a collective cultural level, and then I've gotten really curious about it at an individual level. So, like, as I think about identity, a lot of it has been around, like, how much of our identity have we chosen? And, how much is something that we have agency over? And can we change our identity? And how does that process work? And what is the connection between the self and the social? And, all of that.
And what have been the most profound or interesting discoveries you've made along that line of inquiry?
Well, one, I think I can say with confidence that I feel that the self and the social are intimately and intricately connected. Um, I actually think that in public discourse, particularly around politics right now, there's some fascinating things happening in terms of separating out the self and the social. Like, either you are collectively oriented or you know, you care about the self. Like, and I think that those things are really I just see it as a both and. I think it's really unhealthy to try to disconnect those things, and I think
Mhm.
actually, at least in US politics, I think whether you are liberal or conservative, there's ways that both sides are really kind of separating those things out in interesting ways. Um, so I am firm on the self and the social are intimately connected. You can't separate them. They're, like, they're always connected to each other. Um, I think that change is inevitable and it's also profoundly difficult. I believe that we do have agency. I think that I am, uh, kind of believe in radical agency. I have a radical, I believe that even in the moments where agency is really limited, that there are cracks and fissures, there are spaces where people have choice. Um, and so it's finding that and wiggling in those little spaces that I find hope and, um, possibility. So those are some of the things that I think I feel a little more confident in.
Do you have any, uh, theories that you don't feel very confident in, but are maybe budding or interesting to you?
I think that some of the theories that I'm trying to wiggle jiggle out
Mhm.
recently is probably around, you know, is change incremental or is it revolutionary or both? Or, I'm really kind of
When
fascinated
you say
in.
revolutionary, do you mean more like instantaneous? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the field of anthropology, when they're looking at cultures and change,
Mhm.
there's kind of team incremental change, but then there's also a lot that would say like, a plague happens or a really big disaster or, a new invention. And all of a sudden, things shift quite quickly. And, I think we're in a fascinating moment in history where we have AI and we just had COVID, and there are just a lot of things happening. And so I think about that kind of cultural change and I'm like, well, how does that play out on an individual level, right? Um, are are individuals similar to that, right? Some people say, oh, people aren't going to change till they hit rock bottom. That would be a more revolutionary approach to thinking about change,
Yeah.
right? Something, or something massive happens in your life, you have a big aha moment, you finally make some changes. Or, other people are like team like tiny habits, that we make
Yeah.
these really incremental changes and like that's over time we shift. And I think it's definitely a both and, but I'm kind of curious what those lessons can provide me in helping other people move through changes that they intentionally want to make in their lives.
Mhm. It does seem like there are some states, and I say states like states of being, not states of the United States. Some states in which change is much more rapid and extreme. Like, within the context of a relationship, if there's a lot of safety and trust built in that relationship, it's almost like there's a huge safety net, and that allows for a person to take much greater risks, and risks are risks and change are different ways of looking at the same thing. And so if somebody senses that they are unsafe or that they have no safety net or no fallback, they tend to play much more conservatively in all areas. And there are changes, but they're not obvious on the surface. Whereas if somebody senses that they have some either safety or that the risk of staying the same is greater than the risk of changing, then you see this sudden kind of bursts. But I do have a theory I've been playing with that I'd love to run by you, which is this idea that all beliefs are limiting.
Mm,
What do you think about that?
I'm in. Let's tease this out. um, oh, I like that. Tell me more.
Well, I got I've heard the term limiting beliefs a million times, and I've worked with it, and I I came to be able to recognize limiting beliefs very easily when I'd hear them in myself and in others. There's like this category of beliefs that was like, oh yeah, those are clearly limiting. They're obvious. You say something like, I can't do XYZ. Well, just right there in the words, it's like you're placing a limit on yourself. But then I just started to notice that there were some limiting beliefs that weren't so obvious, like, it wasn't stated as explicitly as I can't do X. Um, it might be stated in the positive way where I am X. So, like, for example, personality typing systems. People love saying, "I am a captain, I am a whatever," and they've got some piece of paper that says that. And it's like, okay, well, then I realized, well, by definition, as soon as you put yourself in that category, then you're not a bunch of other things. And so that's limiting. Saying I am this is just as limiting as saying I am not something else or that I can't. And then I started to realize it's like, okay, well, people are actually, even if they don't explicitly say I am XYZ, which you might call like an identity statement, um, oftentimes identity statements are embedded in language, even if they're not explicitly stated. Even saying something like, my favorite color is blue is an identity statement. I am the person whose favorite color is blue. I'm not a person whose favorite color is red. And kind of the further you dig on this, it's like almost every conceivable statement and contains like these embedded, what I would call identity commitments, which are beliefs about one's self, like who I am. You can find them baked into almost everything. Now, not entirely everything, 'cause it's possible for people to make statements like 2 plus 2 equals 4, which you could argue that they're making a statement about their own belief that 2 plus 2 equals 4, but it could just be like a computer just passing along information that's kind of separate from themselves. But most of the time, when people are communicating, even in their body language and in their tone, there's
Mm.
these beliefs that are embedded in there, and all of them are structure they're all identity related of, "This is who I am, that's what I'm not," and therefore, they place limits on you. That's been my thinking. I haven't developed the thinking super far, but you seem like you've thought a lot about these things.
Well, it's interesting because I think if we think about our beliefs as things that we might say, like statements, I thought it was interesting when you started talking about nonverbals, right?
Mhm.
That becomes that I maybe have more loose ideas around, but, um, I do think that language has its constraints. It's part of the reason why I think the activity of naming your emotions and there's so much power in naming, and what you're probably finding too is as you're able to name more, right,
Mhm.
that it actually expands your capacity as a human.
Yeah.
The more vocabulary that we have to express ourselves, there's, more possibilities, but there's always constraints within our language. And I also think about who right away when you shared your hypothesis with me that, all beliefs are limiting, the immediate thing that I thought of is I dislike a lot of discourse around strengths
Mm.
because this idea that we have strengths and then we have weaknesses and like, figure out what your strengths are and play to your strengths because I've actually found working with people that I think our strengths are our darlings and and that it's oftentimes when people have some limiting behaviors that it's because they're trying to protect their strengths or that it's in their strengths. So their strength is also the thing that's holding them back. So it's the thing that helps them grow. It's also the thing that holds them back. And I was like thinking about that in terms of context of beliefs that we might have and sort of this simultaneous desire to around beliefs where I want to hold a belief loosely and simultaneously want to be a person that has convictions.
Yeah.
That I want to be convicted. I want to be committed. I want to be focused, but like also mm, the liberation that comes with like holding a belief loosely. It's almost the concept of detachment.
Yeah.
I don't know. So yeah, I think that much like maybe how I think that we do have strengths, but those same strengths can get in our way. Maybe it's the same thing with beliefs that, like, it's important to maybe explore beliefs, figure out what you believe, but to also recognize that there's also limitations to any belief.
Yeah, and part of that too is I came to that, I don't wanna say realization because that makes it sound like, "Oh, this is a true thing," and I figured it out. More of like that hypothesis struck me, and what followed shortly afterwards was, "Oh, well, limitation is not bad." Like, the statement isn't like beliefs are bad, it's like beliefs are limiting, but limitation is also extremely useful sometimes. Like, to your point, like, being being everything everywhere all at once all the time is a little overwhelming and not always, useful for functioning in the world. So there's, like, that ebb and flow of, "Okay, I am holding on to this. I am holding on, and it is giving me some sort of stable structure to hold on to," but also recognizing I'm holding on to it right now, and I might not be holding on to it tomorrow. Like, if I'm climbing a ladder, it's not like I just wanna grab a rung and just hold it forever. Like, it's like, "Alright, this is I'm intentionally holding on to this temporarily, with the expectation of letting it go when I'm ready to grab onto the next one." But this idea has it's been helpful for me in understanding I had a lot of, kind of misgivings about a lot of what I hear about mindset and things like that, um, because what I would hear is people just swapping out a belief for a different one and then treating the new one as if it's like, I've made it, like, if I shift from I'm unworthy to I'm worthy, and then it's like, "Ah, there we go, I've made the shift and now everything's great." And it's like, well, no, not necessarily, like, yeah, the previous belief might have been, not helpful to you anymore, and maybe it was time to move on to another rung, but that probably isn't the last rung in the ladder, and it struck me, again, same mentor, I think, said this thing, like, it's right there in the word mindset. Mind set. You're setting it. It's like and, if it gets too set, then now you're overly rigid and you're stuck. Um,
I recently wrote about some of my own, I don't know, reaction to the word mindset, and that I've been playing around with the word posture.
hmm,
And, for me, I love what you just said because I think it solidified some of I don't know, I just felt, I don't know, an ickiness around mindset or
mhm,
um a reluctance or a resistance around some of the talk around mindset. And so for me, I had realized that sometimes it felt disembodied for me.
mhm,
And so I've been thinking about, well, what is my posture towards this?
yeah, it's much more holistic. Yeah,
And I think that that was a really helpful reframe for me, but I love one, the ladder metaphor is really helpful, and also just the separation of the word mind and set, and thinking about, you know, just because something served you at a moment, like you needed that rung in that moment, it was serving you. But now you're trying to, I don't know, surf, and that rung doesn't really help you surf anymore. You're
yeah,
not, and so I think that that's a really generative thing for me to give some space to thinking about.
yeah, the latter idea just actually came to me as I was saying it, so thank you for listening that, and now I've got something to think about too. You keep using the word generative too. I have a friend of mine who uses that word all the time, and he really enjoys that concept. It's funny to hear it from someone else. I don't hear that word very often.
It's actually a word that I use because I don't love the word productive.
Yeah, that's got
Uh,
a lot of connotations.
I like the idea that, like, mm, sometimes productive feels like the set and mindset.
Yeah,
"Oh, I have produced it, I have made it the outcome, we have arrived, I am worthy."
yeah, yeah,
And I like that generative is more about, like, continuing.
yeah.
Like, it's dialogic, like, let's keep it rolling. Um,
Mhm,
I also was thinking when you're talking about limitations and how that isn't necessarily, like, a negative thing, my big lesson around that was trying to teach myself creativity and thinking about how I teach others creativity. And I learned in the classroom really, and in theatrical spaces as well, that to give people limitations is what actually evoked their creativity.
yeah,
So it would be like, "Okay, you get to use this one prompt or this one,"
mhm,
right? And it needs to be 10 other things. How are you gonna do it?
mhm,
It's I have to remind myself of how possible limitations make certain things because it is really easy to immediately think limitation, negative.
mhm, mhm.
Um, I appreciated that, thank you.
Thank you. And this conversation has picked up lots of speed and energy, which means it's the perfect time to let it go. But I do wanna give you the opportunity if there are any people who might be listening to this, is there anything that you'd like to say to them before we close?
This was a wild ride of a this was a wild ride of a conversation, and, I'm glad that y'all joined, and I would love to connect with you. You can find me on LinkedIn or hop on over to Plan Goal Plan, and that's where I'm at.
Plan, goal, plan. Is that a website?
That's a website, that's my podcast as well.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you, Danielle. I think this was very generative, and I look forward to seeing what it generates.
Absolutely, thank you, Colin.
Bye.
The Superhuman Academy podcast is hosted by Collin Jewett and designed and edited by Army Cinco, with original music by Joshua Schunig and voiceovers by Corey Page Schunig. That's me. You can find past episodes and resources, as well as access to the ever-growing Superhuman Academy community at superhumanacademy.com. If you like the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice.